Well, my question is actually twofold. The first is, you talked about how academic spaces and institutions are being, we use this discourse of cultural exchange in academic institutions and spaces. And I was wondering, in terms of our context here, this argument is being used against Israeli Apartheid Week in a lot of ways. So what is the response to that in our context here? Especially that, we do come to university here and they tell us that we can't have a position such as anti-apartheid position because we're in an institution for cultural exchange. My second question has to do with feminist discourse. I work with a lot of feminist and women's rights organizations and movements, and my question is, why is it important for women's organizations and movements to adopt a BDS policy? Especially that a lot of the arguments that I get from my personal experience is that we're talking about women's struggles across the board. And there are feminist organizations in Israel, such as Kolech, who work within a feminist agenda, yet they have very problematic analysis around occupation and colonization. So that's it.
Let me say this, I think there is always a politics to cultural exchange. Cultural exchange presumes that everybody can arrive at the place where the exchange takes place. So, and if rights of mobility are restricted, not everybody can arrive. There are organizations like Seeds for Peace that do cultural exchange between Israel and Palestine. There are bereavement groups, some of you may well know about, parents who've lost children who are Israeli and who are Palestinian. But the problem that I have with these ideas of cultural exchange is that most of them assume that you cannot talk about the power differential that either lets the exchange take place, which is a condition of possibility of the exchange and limits the participants, or that restricts exchange or makes exchange impossible. Right? For a Palestinian academic to be invited to the United States to give a talk, the wait for the visa, the various hoops you have to go through, and then sometimes you are still denied. I don't know if Omar ever got out. Do we know? I mean, Omar Barghouti himself has been detained by bureaucratic officials in Israel who are frightened of a certain exchange of ideas, right? We don't want BDS exchange, right? But if you were going to be really radical about cultural exchange, you would militate for equal conditions of participation. You would break down the wall and the checkpoints. You would have to dismantle the occupation, and then maybe we could talk about cultural exchange. I think that there are strong feminist and queer movements that are participating in BDS at this point, which are really crucial to its success. And there are two things I want to say about that. One is that it will not do for BDS to be a completely male-driven organization. Interestingly enough, the group in Ramallah who organizes it is drawn primarily from the women's studies faculty at Beer Zeiss, right? It's just true. Lisa Charaki, Isla Jad work closely with Omar Barghouti and others. So this has been understood as part of the feminist movement and part of the queer movement, now that we have, I think, a really important Palestinian queers for BDS, who just finished their tour in the United States. These struggles, feminist struggles, queer struggles, have always been social justice struggles. And it's not okay to struggle for women's rights on the condition of an occupation that denies the rights of Palestinians across the board. It's not okay to struggle for queer rights on the condition that others are deprived of rights. Otherwise, we become a movement that is implicated in the perpetuation of inequality. So if feminism and if queer politics is going to be part of a radical social justice program, as it must be, then it needs not only to struggle for equality and justice for a narrow identitarian claim, but to make sure that its struggles are not participating in structures that reproduce inequality and injustice for others.
Thank you for the talk and for making the journey from my hometown, Berkeley. One of the things that I'm really drawn to in general, I'm not holding this up, thank you, about your work is kind of drawing attention to the meaningful fluidity and often lack of definition in neat categories that are often supposed to be beneath binaries and neat organized systems of thought. And in light of the Israeli-Palestinian situation and conflict, it increasingly seems that there needs to be some application of that any roadmap that tries to be too logical or too simplistic is going to, it's not going to go to the heart of the matter, and it's not going to be sustainable. And in a speech you gave in 2004, towards the end of it, you drew attention to Mahmoud Darwish's work, and specifically this line in Memory for Forgetfulness, with a lover speaking to her, a woman speaking to her Israeli lover, or no, a man speaking to his Israeli lover.
Palestinian man, Israeli woman.
Yeah. I don't love you, but I love you. And you drew attention to that paradox, sort of the grounds necessary for coalition. And I would like you to speak more onto that, and specifically, like, what are those kind of psychological, intellectual foundations for peace, and how do they relate to paradox and to dissolving some of these new categories that we construct?
Well, let me just say this, I don't have a political stand in favor of the instability of categories as such. Only under regimes in which the stabilizing of categories works to perpetuate subjugation do I think that destabilization of categories might be a good thing. But I also think sometimes destabilizing categories can be an operation of power that we need to resist. So we'll need that said, I think that what I've been trying to do, especially in a manuscript that I'm just finishing, which traces, among other things, Jewishness and the critique of Zionism, is trying to think a little bit about what binationalism would be, what would a binationalism be that would take apart the idea of the nation or the nationalism of the nation. And what I'm interested in showing is that even these efforts at radical separation that the Israelis think they are making by building the wall actually binds them to the Palestinians for life. And the settlements that are built within the West Bank also produces a kind of hideous neighborliness, okay, between the settlements who are, filled with the most right-wing of Israelis and the local Palestinian population. So what we have, in my view, are wretched forms of binationalism. Up againstness, adjacency. It's not possible to have a territory without a boundary. If you have a boundary, you are connected with what's on the other side. Okay, you don't have to be like an advanced Hegelian to understand that.